Hi everybody. Welcome to History Dad. Today we're going to continue our series on the history of sexuality. Specifically, we're going to talk about the history of women and sexuality. Even more specifically, we're going to talk about the history of control or authority over women's sexuality. Now, I'm going to use some explicit language. It might be material or subject matter that many aren't comfortable with, or if you have young kids and don't want them to hear this, I am going to give you the count of 5 to switch videos and go watch the one on pirates. That's a good one. Yeah, go watch pirates. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, here we go. Okay, we're going to start in the medieval period. And you have to realize people had a lot of different outlooks at that time. First of all, if you watched the first video in this series, you realize that a lot of people going into this believed in the one-sex model. They believed we were the same sex at different stages. So what was believed up to this point was that for a woman to conceive of a child, she had to have an orgasm, same as a man would. It only made sense that without the pleasure, without the orgasm, conception wouldn't happen. Okay, that's important to keep in mind for this period. There were a lot of other ideas also going on. It was around now that doctors, the medical profession, began to believe that if you overindulged in sex, it was bad for your health. Too much sex would kill you. They also came to believe that of men and women, women were the more lustful, the more inclined to sex. They had a greater proclivity towards sex. Okay, so you also had at this time an idea forming in the church. They started to believe, science started to say, well, you know what, for women to conceive of a child, they don't have to have an orgasm, which raised a bunch of questions. They started to ask, okay, well, if it isn't necessary for procreation, why do women have lust? What is women's lust about? Well, the answer they came up with was obviously the devil. It was about sin. It was a temptation. All right, so let's put these together. The doctors say too much sex will kill you. The church says female lust is from the devil. So obviously what they decided was, in a marriage, the man had to control his wife's sexuality. Otherwise, you're opening yourself up to a world of horrible health. You'll die, and you'll be committing sin left and right. You'll go to hell. Men had to control the woman's sexuality. Okay. Now we're going to move forward a little bit. We're going to move on to more the Enlightenment, even a little bit later, into the 19th century, the 1800s. So it was a time of science and reason, and people stopped thinking it was going to be sinful for a woman to like sex. But there was still a control issue. The doctors came up with a disease called hysteria. It was directly related in their mind to sexual frustration or sexual forwardness. You would have to go to a doctor to be treated for hysteria if you were a woman. The symptoms included yawning, itching, insomnia, uneasiness. If you had a sexual fantasy, or if you were simply disagreeing with your husband, hysteria, go to the doctor, get that taken care of. Okay, it is not quite the same as saying you had to control all of a woman's sexuality, but it was still, in the medicalization, men taking control and saying that women's sexuality was something of an issue. It was a problem. All right, now we're going to move forward quite a bit. In the 20th century, they used this idea, this control over sexuality, they took it to new levels, a different direction. In, for example, the 1970s, as late as the 1970s, men were authorizing, doctors, really all of society, but let's not kid ourselves, it was male-dominated medical society and political. The political world was dominated by men. Um, Throughout the 20th century, they used sterilization. Okay, now I'm going to tell you a little bit of statistics of what was going on. In 1933, in North Carolina, there were 7,683, I think, sterilizations of women paid for by the government. 5,000 of those were black women. Since 1964, of all the sterilizations done in North Carolina, 65% of those women sterilized were black, 35% white. In 1972, there have been different estimates, but it is likely that anywhere between 100 and 200,000 sterilizations were paid for by the federal government in 1 year. Dr. Clovis Pierce in the 1970s, he was a doctor in South Carolina. He had a policy: any woman on welfare who came in and was pregnant and wanted him to deliver her baby, she had to submit to sterilization at that time. By 1976, 24%, it's estimated, 1 in 4 of the women giving birth at the Indian Health Services Hospital in Claremore, Oklahoma, 1 in 4 was sterilized after. Okay? By 1970, the numbers suggest that 20% of married black women were sterilized, and that's the same for Chicano women. Okay, now how does this tie in? Well, it does in very important and interesting ways. You have to remember, at this same time, women's liberation was going on, and middle-class white women were clamoring for the right for birth control and abortions, and to have an abortion. And this was a big deal. This fight. The government was not allowing white women to have this control over their body. At the same time, the government was using its control over women's sexuality and their bodies to actually sterilize a large section of the population. This is obviously racism, and we're going to go into this sometime on another talk, but what I want to focus on a little bit here is this control issue. In both of these situations, it was the government, let's face it, it was mostly white men, using this control, whatever leverage they had to control women's sexuality in a way that they felt was proper. Not women. They were using it to, in essence, remove the birth rate, remove the birth of minorities and people they did not really desire in the country, while limiting white women's ability to control their own bodies so that they didn't have to give birth. They were trying to whiten America, in essence. This is important, and I know this talk is edging into a racial talk, but it all ties together. It's about control. If you're ever wondering why a lot of the women's liberation movement, or why some of these women are so angry, they got some really good reasons. Some excellent reasons. The government has, for centuries, really, trying to control their bodies and sexuality for its own purposes. To maintain their level of control, to shape the nation in a way they feel is proper. This all ties together. It ties into basic human rights on all levels. And this is important stuff. If you're looking for more to read on this, there's an excellent article by Angela Davis called Racism, Birth Control, and Reproductive Rights. Go look for it, download it, read it. This is important stuff. it ties into our past, and it's important going forward into our future. We need to understand the things that have been done and why, if we want to make a better, more racially, just a more equal future between men, women, all races. These things all tie together. Alright, I feel like I'm getting a little preachy as opposed to a history lecture, so I'm going to let you go. Go outside, do something fun, get some sunshine, and we'll talk again later. Bye.